The DJI Air unit is the smallest, lightest, high-definition FPV video transmitter that has ever been invented. But it still wasn't small and light enough for some people, and that brought us the Caddx Vista. And the Caddx Vista has gotten even smaller and lighter today with the release of the Caddx Nebula. The Caddx Nebula takes the existing DJI camera and swaps it out for an even smaller and lighter camera. But there's more going on here than just a slight reduction in weight, because this is a completely different camera with different image characteristics, and we're going to find out today how it compares. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. Hey there folks, Joshua from the future here with a quick word before we get into this video, because some new information has come out since I recorded this, and it's going to look real dumb if it seems like I'm pretending that information doesn't exist. This here is the Caddx Nebula Nano. This is the product that Caddx sent me when they said, oh, we're going to send you a Caddx Nebula. Do you want to review it? Yes, please. The Caddx Nebula Nano is a nano-sized camera, 14 millimeters, and it only connects to the DJI Air unit or the Caddx Vista. However, there is also a Caddx Nebula Micro, which can do both analog and digital output, not at the same time, but one or the other. And at the time that I recorded this video, I didn't know that this product existed. I don't know if I just missed it or if it hadn't been announced yet. But so when you hear me talking about this camera as if it only connects to the DJI system and if it is only available in a nano size, that's why. I'm going to go ahead and release this review anyway, because I think that when you see the image quality of the Caddx Nebula, well, I'm not sure that the fact that it's also available in a micro size for analog is going to make much difference. But if you're wondering why am I not acknowledging that it also comes in a micro size and that it sometimes could hook up to an analog video transmitter, that's why. I want to start this video by comparing the weight of these two video transmitters, just to give you a perspective on how much difference there really is between them. The DJI Air unit with its antennas comes in at about 54 grams, and the Caddx Vista with its antenna comes in at 26 grams. Now, we're not quite down to the weight of an analog video transmitter and camera, but by golly, we're getting close. But I think that size is really where the difference between these two cameras is most apparent, because the Caddx Nebula is only about 4 grams lighter than the camera that comes with the DJI Air unit or the Caddx Vista. That camera is about 8 or 9 grams. The Caddx Nebula camera is about 4 to 5 grams. Now, as far as size goes, here's a typical micro camera, and you can see that its dimension is about 19 and change, 19 millimeters nominally, by about 19 millimeters. So it's about 19 by 19, and that's what it should be. Compared to the camera on the DJI Air unit, or the Vista, it comes in at about 20 millimeters, and I've kind of always wondered why. Why did you make it 9? I mean, obviously they made it the size that they made it, but it's kind of annoying that it's like 1 millimeter bigger, 21 by 20. But you get it in there. You fit it in most frames with a micro. Even frames with like carbon fiber side plates, you can squeeze it in there. I've done it. And then here we've got the Nebula, and this comes in at more like a nano size, 14 millimeters by 14-ish millimeters. Now, the truth is that the exact dimensions of these cameras are generally not critical, because a lot of people are going to be mounting them in 3D printed mounts, and they've got a little bit of give. But if those dimensions are critical to you, now you know. And you definitely will need some kind of an adapter to put the Nebula in a typical frame that's sized for a micro camera. And that means that if you try to retrofit the Nebula into a frame designed for the Vista or the Air unit, you're actually probably not going to save that much weight, because the 4 grams you save by going to the Nebula, you're going to lose some of that by having to like print a 3D printed bracket or something. But the bottom line is that we're probably going to see some newer, smaller frames designed for the Caddx Nebula, if the Caddx Nebula's image quality is up to par. Because this is not just the exact same camera with a smaller case. There are some pretty significant differences here. And the 3 main differences between the Caddx Nebula and the existing DJI camera are: The Caddx Nebula is 16:9 widescreen only. You do not have the option to switch to 4:3. The Caddx Nebula has better low light sensitivity and wide dynamic range. And the Caddx Nebula does not give you the option to switch between high quality and low latency mode. It just has default mode, whatever that is. Well, there's only one thing left to do, and let's put this guy on a quadcopter and see how its image quality compares to the original Caddx Vista camera. If you need some help getting your Vista set up, there's a link in my video description down below to my setup of the Beta FPV 95X. I installed the Caddx Vista on that, and I show how to install the antenna and solder up the wires, and you can check that video out if you need to know how to do that. So here is the image from the Caddx Nebula, and in just a second I'm going to show it to you side by side with the image from the original Caddx Vista camera. But the first thing I want to show you is the difference in field of view between the 16:9 Nebula, which cannot go to 4:3, and the 4:3 Vista. Now if you already fly in 16:9 mode, then this is what you're already used to. But personally, I prefer to fly in 4:3 because you just see so much more vertical field of view, and I feel like you have a much better sense of what's going on around the quadcopter. As far as image quality goes, one place where the Nebula definitely has the advantage over the Vista is in terms of dynamic range. It has more detail in the highlights and especially more detail in the shadows. You'll see this as I fly into this dark area behind the barn. You get detail sooner with the Nebula than with the Vista. But this is not without some trade-offs. The Nebula's image has a real over-sharpened effect that I've seen on some other standard definition cameras, and unfortunately there is no way to adjust this. The Nebula does not have adjustable settings. Brightness, exposure, saturation, sharpness, nothing. What you see is what you get, and you either like it or you don't. So we've got these really weird sort of halos almost on the highlights, and personally to me, I'm not sure it's a net positive. But there's something else going on with the Nebula's image because it seems to have a kind of blurriness, a smeariness in details where the Vista camera is relatively sharp. And this is not just in areas here where there's like tree needles and details. It almost seems like it's not an optical thing, but like an encoding thing. In this shot of the ceiling of my barn, you can see that the floor joists are sharp, indicating that the camera is correctly focused. And I suspected this might have something to do with focus, so I very carefully focused the camera. But the wood grain in between the joists on the Nebula is all smeary and blurred out, whereas it's visible on the Vista. So I think the Nebula is doing something to the image to try to, I don't know, it's processing the image in some way that is causing it to lose detail in some areas. So that brings us to the end of the video, and as always, the question, should you buy it? And I think for most people, the answer to this question is going to be no. Because the person who's going to buy the Nebula is a person who looks at the Vista and goes, yeah, but could it be 5 grams lighter? And 5 grams, I mean, we'd all take 5 grams less weight, would we? Because if you're flying a 5-inch quad, you don't care about 5 grams of weight. And if you're flying like an actual Tiny Whoop, you're not even looking at the Vista in the first place. A 65mm Tiny Whoop can't carry either of these cameras. So who is the person for whom the 5 extra grams and roughly 5 millimeters in size of the Caddx Nebula is going to be oh, that's what gets me in the door? Now, there's a quadcopter out there where that makes sense. Like, you could imagine a quadcopter in the maybe 50 gram weight, maybe 75 or 85 millimeter props. And for that quadcopter, an extra 5 grams of weight is 10% of its all up weight. That is going to make a difference in how it flies. And it could make a difference between getting a Vista into that quad and not getting that quad into the air at all. But for everybody else, the things you give up when you go to the Nebula are, it seems like it's too much. You don't have the ability to fly in 4.3. You only have 16.9. I think the image quality is objectively worse. You may agree or disagree based on the footage you see here. I think it's just worse. I guess that's subjective, not objective. Okay, fine. You don't have the ability to tweak the image settings like the exposure, the saturation, any of that stuff. You can't even switch from high quality to low latency mode. You just don't have the option to do any of that stuff. It's locked into the camera. And I don't think most people are going to be willing to give up that stuff in order to save 5 grams. But if you are, then the Caddx Nebula is here for you. And bonus, the Caddx Nebula camera is only about $36, whereas the DJI FPV camera is closer to $60. So if you've smashed your DJI camera and you want to give the Nebula a try, it is a much less expensive replacement. But the idea, when people hear that I'm reviewing the Nebula, they say, "So, DJI Tiny Whoops?" And I'm like, no, that was never going to happen. The whole Nebula weighs as much as a whole Tiny Whoop normally weighs. So I guess it depends on your definition of Tiny Whoop, because these days we have 4-inch Tiny Whoops. Okay, maybe in a case like that, the Caddx Nebula would be the right choice for you. Personally, I would stick with the Vista. Sorry, Caddx. You're going to have to make it even lighter before the trade-offs are worth it. That's my opinion, but if you disagree, there's links in the video description where you can buy the products, and there are affiliate links, and I get a commission, and that means I can pay my rent and buy food for my family. So happy flying?
What are you doing in here? The least you could do is subscribe or join my Patreon, or like, just here's another video I picked out for you. Jeez.